Marigolds by Eugenia Collier. When I think of the hometown of my youth, all that I seem to remember is dust, the brown, crumbly dust of late summer. Arid, sterile dust that gets into the eyes and makes them water, gets into the throat and between the toes of bare brown feet. I don't know why I should remember only the dust. Surely there must have been lush green lawns and paved streets under leafy shade trees somewhere in town. But memory is an abstract painting. It does not present things as they are, but rather as they feel. And so, when I think of that time and that place, I remember only the dry September of the dirt roads and grassless yards of the shanty town where I lived. And one other thing I remember, another incongruency of memory, a brilliant splash of sunny yellow against the dust. Miss Lottie's marigolds. Whenever the memory of those marigolds flashes across my mind, a strange nostalgia comes with it and remains long after the picture has faded. Nostalgia means bittersweet longing for things from the past. I feel again the chaotic emotions of adolescence, elusive as smoke, yet as real as potted geranium before me now. Joy and rage and wild animal gladness and shame become tangled together in the multicolored skein of 14 going on 15, and as 15 as I recall that devastating moment when I was suddenly more woman than child years ago in Miss Lottie's yard. I think of those marigolds as the strangest times. I remember them vividly now as I desperately pass away the time waiting for you, who will not come. I suppose that futile waiting was the sorrowful background music of our impoverished little community when I was young. Futile means having no useful result, so it's like useless. The depression that gripped the nation was no new thing to us, for the black workers of rural Maryland had always been depressed. I don't know what it was that we were waiting for, certainly not for the prosperity that was just around the corner, for those were white folks' words, which we never believed, nor did we wait for hard work and thrift to pay off in shining success as the American dream promised, for we knew better than that, too. Perhaps we waited for a miracle and for us in concept, but necessary if one were to have the grit to rise before the dawn each day and labor in the white man's vineyard until after dark, or to wander about in the September dust, offering to one's sweat in return for some meager share of bread. But God was chary with miracles in those days, and so we waited and waited. Chary means he was sparing with miracles. We, children, of course, were only vaguely aware of the extent of our poverty. Having no radios, few newspapers, and no magazines, we were somewhat unaware of the world outside our community. Nowadays, we would be called culturally deprived, and people would write books and hold conferences about us. In those days, everybody we knew was just as hungry and ill-clad as we were. Poverty was the cage in which we were all trapped, and our hatred of it was still the vague, undirected restlessness of the zoo-bred flamingo who knows that nature created him to fly free. As I think of those days, I feel most poignantly the tag end of summer, poignantly in profound, moving manner. So I really feel it most poignantly. The tag end of summer, the bright, dry times when we began to have a sense of shortening days and the immense of the cold. By the time I was 14, my brother Joey and I were the only children left at our house, the older ones having left home for early marriage or the lure of the city, and the two babies having been sent to relatives who might care for them better than we. Joey was 3 years younger than I, and a boy, and therefore vastly inferior. Each morning our mother and father trudged wearily down the dirt road and around the bend, she to her domestic job, he to his daily unsuccessful quest for work. After our few chores around the tumble-down shanty, Joey and I were free to run wild in the sun with other children similarly situated. For the most part, those days are ill-defined in my memory, running together and combining like a fresh watercolor painting left out in the rain. I remember squatting in the road, drawing a picture in the dust, a picture that Joey gleefully erased with one sweep of his dirty foot. I remember fishing for minnows in a muddy creek and watching sadly as they eluded my cupped hands while Joey laughed uproariously. And I remember that year, a strange restlessness of body and of spirit, a feeling that something old and familiar was ending and something unknown and therefore terrifying was beginning. Lisbeth, the narrator, is almost 15 at this point in the story. You have to ask yourself what changes are taking place in her life. One day returns to me with special clarity. For some reason, perhaps because it was the beginning of the experience that in some inexplicable way marked the end of innocence. I was loafing under the great oak tree in our yard, deep in some reverie which I have now forgotten, except that it involved some secret thoughts of one of the Harris boys across the yard. Joey and a bunch of the kids were bored now with the old tire suspended from an oak limb, which had kept them entertained for a while. "Hey, Lisbeth," Joey yelled. He never talked when he could yell. "Hey, Lisbeth, let's let us go somewhere." I came reluctantly from my private world. "Where do you want to go? What do you want to do?" The truth was that we were becoming tired of the formlessness of our summer days. The idleness whose prospect had seemed so beautiful during the busy days of spring now degenerated to an almost desperate effort to fill up the empty midday hours. Let's go see, can we find some locusts on the hill?" someone suggested. Joey was scornful. "Ain't no more locusts there. Y'all got 'em all while they was still green." The argument that followed was brief and not really worth the effort. Hunting locust trees wasn't fun anymore by now. "Tell you what," said Joey finally, his eyes sparkling. "Let's go over to Miss Lottie's." The idea caught on at once, for annoying Miss Lottie was always fun. I was still child enough to scamper along with the group over rickety fences and through bushes that tore our already raggedy clothes back to where Miss Lottie lived. I think now that we must have made a tragicomic spectacle. 5 or 6 kids of different ages, each of us clad in only one garment, the girls in faded dresses that were too long or too short, the boys in patchy pants, their sweaty brown chests gleaming in the hot sun. A little cloud of dust followed our thin legs and bare feet as we tramped over the barren land.